Good morning. My name is Professor Jamie Tooman, and I was asked to do some guest lecturing on some topics that's important to your leadership class here as you're obtaining your RN to BSN degree. First of all, I want to thank you for going back to getting your BSN degree. I think education is very important in our profession and commend you for doing so. Like I said, my name is Jamie Tooman. I am a professor here at Mercy College. I teach in both the ASN and the BSN programs. Prior to becoming a full-time faculty member with Mercy College, I was a manager of several different departments at Mercy St. Charles Hospital. Prior to becoming a manager at the hospital, I worked as a charge nurse at St. Anne's Hospital. And prior to that, I was a staff nurse in the ICU at St. Anne's. I was one that went from an RN to get my BSN because I was an associate's degree grad. So I did get my BSN and then went on and got my master's degree in nursing, and I also have a master's degree in healthcare administration. So some topics I'm going to talk to you today about are recruitment and retention, staffing needs, and training and development of staff. The first one I want to talk about is recruitment and retention of staff, because I think that's one of the most important things you can do as a manager for the unit or the department that you work for. To recruit staff, you have to have a good interview process and you have to have a good selection process. Mercy Health does a great job at the initial recruitment. They go through the applications, they weed out the applications, and they only send you the applications that meet the requirements. And then you as a manager need to review those resumes, review those applications, talk to staff, see what type of person they're looking for, and then do an initial set of interviews. As a manager, you bring that person in. My way of doing things is I would bring them in for an interview, give them a tour of the unit, and then provide time for them to ask me any specific questions about the unit. The interview process itself can be kind of sticky at sometimes because there's do's and don'ts to interviews and what you can and can't ask. So I have, for the most part, the same set of questions that I ask each applicant so I can go by and have a fair and biased or unbiased opinion. So I bring the applicant in, and this is assuming then the applicant has met all requirements for the job. Bring the applicant in and just sit down and have kind of a non-formal or informal discussion with them. Ask them a few questions, go over their resume, ask them some goals. Some specific questions I may ask is, where do you see yourself in 5 years? Where do you see yourself in 10 years? What are you bringing to the organization that we may not already have? A big question I like to ask is, what do you know about our organization? Or if they're within our organization, what do you know about our specific unit? Because that shows me that they've done some research and they're just not, waking up that morning and coming in for the interview. I ask them what values they have. If they are part of the organization, I ask them what are Mercy Health's core values to see, how much they're paying attention and how much they're looking at things. As a nurse manager, you hire RNs, you hire ancillary staff. So depending on what I'm hiring, I'll ask them about a team approach, what they do to enhance that team approach. I also ask them what type of people they don't like working with to make sure we don't have any conflict. And then, about their own personal goals. I ask about their education background. I ask about their work background. All professional. You cannot ask anything personal. So I never ask if they're married. I don't ask if they have kids. I don't ask what ethnicity they are. I don't ask what religion they practice. Now, if they offer that up, that's fine, but it's never a question that comes from me because that's illegal. One big thing, especially when you're dealing with women, you can't ask them if they're pregnant. Even if they're 9 months pregnant and their water broke on your office floor, you can't ask that question. But again, if they bring that up, then that's fair game, and you can obviously use that information. But what really I like about the interview process we have here at Mercy Health is the peer interview process. So once I'm done with my interviews, depending on how many I have, I will sit down and I will make a decision on who I send to peer interview. And what peer interview is, if you're not familiar with that, is it's a group of peers on the unit. They will interview those applicants and then they will make the decision. They have a set of questions that they go on, and they ask the interviewees the same questions, and it's like a scoring system. They score the applicants, and then usually it's the highest score wins or is offered the job. As a manager, I think it's very, very important that whoever you pass on to peer interview, you would be comfortable with, because I have a problem with the peer group coming to me and saying, I want to hire Mrs. Smith, and then I go and I hire Mrs. Doe. I think it breaks trust between you and your peer interview group, and they may see something that I didn't see. And let's be honest, if they're a bedside nurse, you're going to have bedside nurses interviewing them, and they're going to pick who they want to work with and who they want to be next to on the floor. That's very important. So I always make it a 99% of the time that I will go with whoever that peer group decides. There has been some circumstances where the peer group decided, okay, we want to go with Mrs. Smith, and after doing some more checks, some things kind of came back in a background that maybe we didn't want as part of Mercy Health, so I did not choose her. But I had that discussion with the peer group and said, hey, listen, some things came back. We needed to go with our second applicant. But that's a rarity, because I do believe that our recruitment team does a good job at screening the applicants. And then as the manager, then you offer that position, and then it's your job to make sure they get here, and then you retain them. Recruiting is, I want to say, an easy part of recruitment and retention. You interview, you hire. Retention is the hardest thing, I think, as a mid-level manager that you have to do, because you're in between the staff level and upper management, and you're trying to make everybody happy, and retention should be one of your main focuses. Some turnover is good. Some turnover is very desirable. Sometimes it's just time for that person to move on in their career or move on to a different opportunity, and that's okay. But a lot of turnover is not good for unit morale. It's not good for productivity. It's not good for budget, and it's not good. It just takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of time and money to orient a new employee, especially a new nurse. That's a lot of training they need, a lot of development, a lot of orientation time, and then for them just to turn around and leave you in a year, and then you have to repeat that process. That can get very, very costly. So some retention things that you need to work on. You need to make sure you have a good, solid unit-based leadership, some informer leaders on the unit that you can go to and get things done. You need to make sure the pay is equitable. You need to make sure their schedules are okay. One thing you don't want to mess up as a manager is staff's pay and staff schedules, because that's their livelihood. But retention, like I said, should be one of your main focuses as a mid-level manager, to make sure you're keeping and you're retaining the good ones. That's really all I want to share on recruitment and retention. And now I'll move on to learning and training and development for staff. Another very important piece that sometimes in today's hectic healthcare arena that we don't have time for. And that is very, I'm very sad to say that, but that's the truth. Sometimes those things are pushed off to the side and other things take priority. But you need to have a good training and education plan for your unit, knowing that training and education are two separate things. Training is more short term. What are you going to get out of this? What are you going to do? And education is more long term, professional development, enhancing their professional career. That's more education. So for the most part, you're going to do a lot of training, whether you're training a new grad or you're training seasoned staff because you have a new product that's come in, or you have a new computer system, or you have new parts of computer systems, or new research that's come and we're going to change this policy or this procedure. All that takes training and education for the staff, because if they don't know, then they can't comply with it. It's also very important to understand that you can't do it all as a unit manager. You have to have those informal leaders on the unit that like to train staff, that like to educate staff, and that can help you do those things. For the most part, hospitals have nurse educators, but again, they're only one person or one department. They kind of plan the education or the training, and then it's your responsibility as a unit manager to make sure all of your staff is trained. That's a very difficult thing to do, depending on the size of the unit. And with nurses and ancillary staff working 12-hour shifts, it's not like you see them every day for a 5-day-a-week period. You may catch them on Monday, and then that nurse may not be back till the weekend. So it's hard to kind of judge all of that stuff. Some things you need to have on the unit, or some people that you need to mark, you need to have some good mentors on the unit, because those are the staff nurses that you can go to and say, hey, we have this policy change. How are we going to roll this out to staff? Here's our time frame, and what's it going to look like? And those nurses take, for the most part, if they want to be in their learning to be a mentor and they're always mentoring staff, they want to help you and they want to do that, and they're going to be more than willing to help you. You will have a few that are going to resist the change, but that's part of life. And as soon as you get those informal leaders on your unit to work with you and to get the other staff on board, then it comes pretty naturally for them. As a hospital system, we have to make sure that our nurses are competent. So we do yearly competencies, we do yearly skills labs. Same as everything, you have to make sure they're competent in their BLS and they're maintaining their BLS. And if they're a unit that needs ACLS or PALS, again, that they're competent and that they're getting those classes and getting that stuff done. We're approaching a RN license renewal year. That's big as a unit manager, because you have to make sure all of your staff are getting their license renewed, and by that drop deadline date, if their license not renewed, they cannot come to work. So that's another, we're in that process right now. We're starting to register and get those licenses renewed for the fall, and that's a big commitment as a nurse manager to do. Some other training and development things. There may be, if you're on a specialty unit, you may need to do some EKG classes or some rhythm strip analysis, or just, I guess, depending on what type of unit you're on, you need to make sure, again, that you have competent nurses working for you 24/7. You just can't have all the competent nurses on day shift and forget about the night shift, because you have to make sure that 24/7 you are responsible for that unit, and you are responsible for the education of the staff and the training of the staff, and you have to make sure that everybody gets the proper training. And like I said, that can be very difficult and time consuming. I do want you to know that I wish sometimes as a unit manager I had more time to do that and more time to develop staff, because I think it just makes it a better working environment. But again, the time constraints and the priorities sometimes weren't always there. Training and development comes out of your budget, so you do have to make sure you budget for it and you're following the productivity guidelines And again, it can get pretty sticky. And then the last topic I'd like to speak to you about is staffing needs. And this is probably the second biggest thing that you'll do as a nursing manager is the staffing needs of the unit. You are responsible 24/7 for that unit and for that staff, and you need to make sure your unit is staffed. There's a couple different models you can do, and I know depending on which hospital you work at or which system you work at, they do different things. Even within the hospitals, units do different things. I am most common with a centralized scheduling than a decentralized scheduling, because that is what I'm, again, familiar with. That is what I've come from. But again, I have to make sure that the unit is staffed. We were an open unit, so that means we floated and people floated in. You can have a closed unit, which means your staffing or your nurses are responsible for the staffing, whether then they're working overtime or they're getting their hours cut if the census isn't met. So that's kind of the differences. It is very, very, very important that staff have input on staffing, because that is a huge retention piece. Hospitals are open 24/7, so yes, they're going to have to work weekends. Yes, they're going to have to work holidays, but if they have some input, it's 100% better. For the most part, I believe they are still every third weekend. So we had a self-scheduling model. So the schedule went out for the next 6 weeks. The weekends were filled in for them. They were on an ABC weekend, and then they were able to choose the days and the shifts they wanted to work. And then the rule was it has to be balanced. If my average daily census requires 7 nurses, then I have to have 7 nurses on every day. I can't have 2 nurses on Friday and 12 nurses on Thursday. That's just not going to work. So they knew that it had to be balanced. And again, you go to your informal leaders. They kind of help you with the balancing. They, talk with staff about moving things around. And the rule was if it was turned into me balanced and there was the number of nurses I needed on every shift, then I didn't touch it. I didn't change it. So that's really then a self-scheduling model. We're 12-hour shifts, and that can be difficult too with continuity of care. And continuity of care is huge. But again, doing 12-hour shifts is a retention policy or a retention effort, because those 8-hour shifts are difficult to get staffing, difficult to fill, especially that 3 to 11 piece, because we know that there's life outside the hospital, and that 3 to 11 piece is really, really hard to fill. So the move was years ago to go to the 12-hour shifts, and that is a retention process to help with the retention. But it's also can be a scheduling difficulty, because then they're only required to work the 3 12-hour shifts, and that leaves a lot of holes. Now, we did implement some mandatory overtime, and that can get pretty sticky, but it's a need right now with the way the staffing shortages are. I think we're going to be coming into some major staffing shortages here in the next 5 to 10 years as our baby boomers start to retire. We're just not producing enough nurses, and that's due to lots of different reasons. Not enough students wanting to be nurses. There's a problem with aging nursing faculty. A lot of the nursing faculty are approaching retirement age, and there's not a lot of younger ones coming into that. So there's a lot of factors that go into the nursing shortages, and staffing and things like that are very cyclical. When I first came out and graduated, they were sign-on bonuses, there were weekend programs where you would just work the weekend. Every weekend you would work 24 hours every weekend, and you would get paid for 36. So essentially you were off Monday through Friday, and you worked every Saturday and Sunday, but you got paid for working 3 days a week. So that's very, those things have gone away as we tended to kind of not have that shortage, but now we're seeing the shortage come back. And like I said, things are very cyclical. So we'll get to that shortage again, and we're just not going to have enough nurses. And we will start to see some of those incentive programs again, I'm fairly sure. Some of those incentive programs are happening already in the South and out West. And as more states are going to mandatory staffing ratios and kind of doing that, we're going to see a bigger staffing shortage, because we just physically do not have the number of nurses to maintain some of these staffing numbers that are being projected out there. You have to make sure you're being fair with staff and when it comes to staffing. We have a kind of an informal rule that you have to work so many Mondays and so many Fridays, so that you're not getting a 3-day weekend every week. So that's hard to do depending on the number of staff you have. There's always manipulation to the schedule, whether so-and-so changed it or, so-and-so erased it. And it just, doing the schedules are not an easy task. For the most, sometimes, there's computer programs that can do it, and the computer programs take the personal out of it. Sometimes I wish we had that. I don't know where they're at with Kronos since I have left. I'm not sure if that is doing anything for them yet. But sometimes I think taking the personal out of it is a lot better than sitting at your desk and working the schedules. So somebody can accuse you of, well, you never make so-and-so work a Friday, but I have to work 4 Fridays and things like that, because that does happen. And then you also, as a nursing manager, want to make sure that your staff have the adequate time off, because we know that if they get the rest and they're away from the unit, they are more productive and more happy employees. And that's difficult to do also, because you can't have 10 people off on the same unit, then you just don't have staff. So that can be contentious at times. But again, if you have policies, you need to make sure you stick with the policies. And it should be, for the most part, some staff-driven policies, so the staff have more buy-in. And if the staff have buy-in, you usually are better. Things go a little more smoothly. I know with some things they're doing with care time, and sorry if you're not from the system, but I'm just speaking of the system that I know. I know they're trying to streamline some policies to make sure the whole system are following the same things. And I do, as a manager, I do think that's a good thing, because I think it will help you in the long run. It kind of takes the bias out of things. But that's really all I have to share. I hope you got some good information out of this. And I wish you luck, and hope to see you when you walk at graduation here from Mercy College.